Hi, and welcome to Leaders in Lending. I'm your host, Jeff Keltner, and today I'm joined by Nate Longfellow, who leads product strategy and transformation at Wells Fargo. Nate, first of all, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us here.
Thanks, Jeff, for having me. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about what product strategy and transformation means? It's a pretty broad topic, I would think, for a job responsibility.
Yeah, there's a lot of words that get passed around a lot, digital and transformation and product management and
Mm,
product strategy. And I think the best way to sum it up is, our organization's responsibility is really working with our business partners and our customers to determine what are the right capabilities that drive the highest value for our customer
mm,
and our organization. And that may include new ways of doing business. So we look at things also from the technology and customer engagement perspective in digital, but all the way through how do we fulfill our mortgages and other services behind the scenes. So
hmm
we have a very broad lens into what the solutions landscape is, and we don't really constrain the thinking to just the customer experience, the team member experience, but we go into the process as well with our business partners and really try to reimagine a better way of doing engagement with our customers or to serve our customers.
I like that. I mean, as a technologist in the Silicon Valley space, we so often start with the consumer's experience, the customer's experience, and how do you deliver that? That really has to be the thing that informs everything you do. And I think so often we see technology siloed into the UX team that does the web interface for the consumer and the internal team that manages the operations, and they're just totally separated. And you end up with this disjointed experience. So I think it's really fascinating that you've got all of that under your purview. I'm curious when you think about it, do the seams show up in your work, like the deltas between internal teams and systems? Does that become a large part of how you think about delivering a system or an experience to the consumer? Or how do you think about that when you're running across different functions and technology stacks and things like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. In fact, I bring it up all the time, and you sort of characterized, I think, how a lot of uh, traditional firms or Silicon Valley
Mm,
firms or others just might think of what a product is, as an example, and that's what gets people get lost in that a lot. Well, what is the product? And a lot of firms will look at the product as being the experience, the customer experience. They'll say, oh, this
hmm
is, and I know I had some colleagues of mine that talk about different, airline companies who think of their product as the buy product, the fly product, and the arrive product. And for me, I think that puts an overly simplistic appreciation for it. And I think it focuses our attention too much on just the superficial experience. That, I mean, not to
hmm
downplay, it's really, really important, but I like to call it's a layer cake, right? It's a layer cake of not just the experience layer, but all the enabling capabilities that make that experience really happen and meaningful. And if you don't plan and look across all those layers, then you're just constraining yourselves to how things are done today. That's why you see me characterize things about
mm
including new ways of doing business. It's all sorts of other technology, all sorts of other processes that line up to it. And to make all that really effective, it takes a lot of really great collaboration and handholding with a variety, especially in an organization the size of Wells Fargo, with a lot of great partners
Sure.
that own various parts of that layer cake to go after it. So it's definitely a challenging task for a company like ours, but it's definitely something we're well suited to address.
Do you have any particular advice on how you do navigate that layer cake? Because I see the same thing, and I see so many digital transformation efforts at lenders being, let's put a better web front end on. We won't change the LOS, we won't change the workflow, but like that's all quote unquote working. But we need we need to webify it, right? And that's like the extent of their digital transformation. And I think there's so much value in extending down the layer cake. But to your point, there's a lot of other constituents, stakeholders inside the institution that have to get on board with that. How do you think about managing that set of relationships, set of processes as you go through an effort? Because it is maybe the hardest part about doing it full stack is you don't own the whole stack, right? You end up having to work with people who across the institution who have different priorities and are owning different pieces of that pie.
Well, you're touching on a really key factor of success, right? So if I have my own objectives and goals to go move some needle for our customer or for our organization, and those aren't shared goals throughout the organization, it really doesn't matter what my goals are, right? So
Yeah.
so I think that is a key part, and I think it's really easy for organizations to say, okay, so and so, this is what you need to go after, and this is your goals and objectives. But if they're not shared objectives from the top down of the organization, you're really creating a really challenging opportunity, environment for your team members to be successful. We've done a really good job of it at Wells Fargo in addressing that really from the top down. We have Mike Weinbach, who runs all of consumer lending here at Wells Fargo.
Hmm.
We have Christy Furco, who's my leader, who runs the home lending organization. And they've done a great job of setting that tone and setting. Well, we use OKRs, so for us, it's hard to dispute or hard to get disconnected on what are we trying to accomplish. We literally have very specific measures that we're trying to go after. And
Mm.
for those who aren't familiar with the acronym, it's objectives and key
Key
results. So
results, yeah.
they're setting those objectives and key results for us at the consumer lending level and at the home lending level. So all the leaders that I work with and partner with, we're all going after the same thing. And so I think that's really, really key. If I'm going after something very different, then I'm struggling, they're struggling, and at the end of the day, we won't move the needle for our customer.
OKRs. I mean, that's we brought that into Upstart from the Google days, where it kind of famously took hold and is how the company is really run. Is that been a new thing for Wells Fargo, and is it done company wide? OKRs are a fascinating way to get alignment across teams. And there's a whole podcast worth of not just an episode, but a whole I think show where on the use of OKRs. But I'm curious how recent that is, and then kind of how the process runs. Is that a top-down process? Is it a bottoms-up process for you guys at Wells Fargo? And how do you kind of align across, sometimes alignment across teams of objectives that point in the same direction is one of the bigger challenges there, and key to what you're talking about. So I'm just kind of curious how you actually execute that.
Yeah, so it is relatively new. Mike Weinbach and Christy joined last year
Hmm.
and took over the reins here, and so it's a fairly new concept that we practice. And we defined our OKRs for 2021,
Hmm.
and we're executing against them. So it's fairly new. And so what we are going through that exercise, I shouldn't say the exercise, we went through an exercise at the end of last year to define those
Yeah.
OKRs, spent a lot of time debating, having good conversations on what they should be, what they shouldn't be, what should really be our focus, what shouldn't be, the exercise alone is worth its weight in gold, if you will. But as we come in and execute against it, what Chrissy's done a great job at is putting a lot of great execution frameworks around it. So once a week,
Hmm.
we literally as a leadership team meet and we provide updates on how we're achieving our OKRs. And it's not just reading out stats, it's trying to identify what are those key indicators underneath
Yeah.
supporting those OKRs that we're making progress on, and what are the efforts we're pursuing to achieve them, and just being very measured about it, just being really focused on what outcomes we're really going after. But it's part of the culture. So we've been in environments before where we've used something similar, and
Hmm.
they just become like a reference point at the beginning of the year. Like this year, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to put it up on the board, and we'll send some great inspirational posters around. But it doesn't become something that's institutionalized in the way you work and how you work every day. And it's great. Now we still are in I think continuous learning exercise around OKRs, in the sense of
Hmm.
it causes us in a good way to question what are our priorities, what should we be going after or not going after, but it really creates a level of focus that we need to really be successful for our customers and for our organization.
I like that. I've always thought OKRs are at their best when they're about focus. They have to tell you not only what you're doing, but in some extent what you're not doing. Because if you have too many priorities, you don't have any. And I think OKRs are a great way to define what are the things that really matter, and highlight them. And to your point, you've got to be holding yourself to them, otherwise you just become platitudes. And the culture develops around them being platitudes, and that's not good. But
That's right.
that's fascinating to hear. I know a lot of technology companies that run on OKRs. I haven't heard of banks using them as much. So
We're not trying
you
to be a
caught my
bank.
attention with that.
Yeah, I think that's part of the transformation that we're going through. Is banking and mortgage is definitely behind the times when it comes to some of these concepts, and we're trying to
Mm.
leverage those better concepts.
Trying to find different paths forward. So
Yeah.
you've been in the digital side of banking and lending. I was looking through your resume, and the word digital came up a lot, which I imagine over the last 3 or 4 years, and particularly the last 2 years, has become one of the hottest topics in banking is digital transformation. But you've been doing it for a little bit longer than I think everybody's been thinking about it. Are there mistakes or misconceptions you see commonly held that people are kind of maybe walking down the wrong path, thinking about something the wrong way, that you think is useful to point out here?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions, it's not about misconceptions, it's sort of like missteps I think I see often
Mm.
is and folks start with a solution. They don't start with a problem. They don't start with the opportunity or the
Mm,
problem. They start with a solution. And we, as maybe humans, we fall in love with solutions versus falling in love with the problem. And this is where I see a lot of things that folks will share their wares on, hey, AI and machine learning and all these great buzzwords that sound really great. And don't get me wrong, they are great, but you can't start there. You can't start with the solution.
yep.
Like that's like finding the hammer and saying, great, I found a hammer. Now let me go find the nail or turn everything into a nail, right? That kind of old adage. I think that's still very pervasive, and I think it's honestly, I think a lot of it's just human nature. It's how we're very solution oriented as a society, and we think we have
Hmm.
we want to jump to the answer, if you will, and there's nothing wrong with being quick and expeditious about things, but you really, really have to fall in love with the problem. And I see a lot of that in some solutions, especially years ago, especially in the mortgage space where
Hmm.
I spend most of my time, where we're pushing for a solution that sounds good versus really, really understanding the problem and the details of it. And we've done a pretty good job, I guess repositioning the way we look at our environment and really getting our
Hmm.
culture to really focus on the problem and the opportunity, and less so much the solution. But because what happens is then you come up with these really, especially in the mortgage industry, just a massive ecosystem, or I don't even know if I call it an ecosystem, but it's just a massive landscape of very pointed solutions, right? That are very
Hmm.
pointed around all sorts of different pain points throughout the industry, and it becomes really challenging because they're really fantastic solutions, if you will, but they're completely disconnected from one another. And so they become, as a large company like Wells Fargo or any large lender for that matter, it's really hard to consume the best of what's out there when they're so disjointed, so fragmented, or so isolated in the problems that they solve.
Well, I'm really curious. It's an interesting take. Solutions are the old hammer and nail adage always gets me. But what do you see as the major problems? I mean, when you say you got to fall in love with the problem, what are the problems you're seeing front of mind in terms of what you need to change or that are causing pain points for your internal customers or your consumer customers? Like what are those problems that you're focused on?
Well, it's a pretty broad set. I think I'll start at the root, if I really, which is we always should put the customer at the center of everything that we do. And so um, I don't think banking as a whole has had the opportunity to do the best job in really realizing that, right? And what I mean by that is,
Hmm.
we spend a lot of time in doing no wrong to our customer, making sure we have the right controls in place so that they have
Hmm.
the products and services that they need. And that's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is the notion that, let's use mortgage as an example. No customer, nobody in this universe wants a mortgage. Like I'm sure, I hope you don't. I don't. Um,
I
but
have
it's
one. I
yeah,
didn't want one.
you don't want one, right? Exactly. Nobody wants one. And so the realization that the customer is at the center of all this, and they're not
Hmm.
on a mortgage journey. That's a means to an end. They're on a homeownership journey, and that's what we need to. That's one of the things that we need to realize, and take more care into, of really driving more value with what the customer's going through, what they need,
Hmm.
and in doing that, I think we'll realize that we'll have a much less of a transactional relationship with our customer, because when we only give them an experience that's about applying for a product or a service and getting
Hmm.
that outcome at the end, it's helpful, it's useful, it's where we're at, and for a lot of us in the maturity of who we are. But at the end of the day, it's transactional, and I think the more and more we can kind of expand our our value proposition to be around what the customer's trying to solve for, then I think that's what I think we're going to be in a much better place, from sort of what needs to change, if you will. So.
That's interesting. How do you see that playing out day to day? Like, when you go from the product centric to the kind of customer centric, what does that cause you to rethink or change? And how does that really, exhibit itself in the way you build a product or interact with a consumer?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in my experience that needs to change is behaviors, not necessarily perspectives. I think
Mm,
anytime what I just shared with you is nothing new, right? I think a lot of folks that
yeah.
are in my seat have a very similar perspective, and might be newer to this industry that I serve, but it might be
Hmm.
old hat to many other, especially in more of the technology space. Um, I think that the biggest challenge is typically the behaviors needed to change. I think it's pretty easy for folks, especially the partners that you work with to serve your customer, to kind of agree with that. Like, yeah, that makes tons of sense. Let's do that. But what's hard is the behaviors, because it gets back to we're very solution oriented, and so we like to think we have all the right answers. Even it goes for me too, right? We're all wired to think we have all the right answers and jumping to those answers. So what really needs to be more systemic around that, if you truly do care about the customer, then let's go first understand our customer. Who are they?
Hmm.
What do they need? Realize they're not all the same. Usually they all come from very diverse backgrounds and experiences and needs and all sorts of different behaviors, and really understand that, and build a discipline about understanding your customer, being able to
Hmm.
use that understanding to then go ideate for the solutions that solve for them, but go develop those ideas, those hypotheses, if you will, go test
Hmm.
them, go validate them, select the right ones, and then go execute. But and then more importantly, test and learn all along the way, and being very open to doing that. I think all of that you'll see what I refer to as their behavior changes. Ideology is pretty easy for folks to get on board with. Like everything I just said, most people are like, yeah, it makes total sense. Why wouldn't everyone do that? Not everybody does, right? Because
Yep.
the behaviors don't change, or the urgency is so urgent. No, I don't need to do all that. I just need to go and I already know the answers. Just go get it done. And there's a happy medium in there in a lot of cases
Hmm.
too. That doesn't mean when I talk through those types of design thinking principles, I always reference it. Hey, it could take 5 minutes. It could take 5 months. It's okay, right? It doesn't mean it has to be bloated to go through that type of
Hmm.
exercise, but the culture needs to believe in it. The culture needs to be just as excited as discovering an idea didn't work as discovering an idea did work. And that's where I
Hmm.
keep getting back to the behaviors and cultures, because it's pretty easy as an organization to say, hey, Nate's got an idea, and is this hammer is the solution? Let's go build this hammer, and then it doesn't provide the results that we were expecting. Well, then I go and try to defend the solution, and I try to make the solution bigger or better or whatever, because I don't want to be wrong, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's the behavior and culture changes that really, really need to also be at the center of it all. Is we have to truly lean in and believe that we don't have all the answers. Let's let the information drive the outcomes, and let's be super excited when those ideas are wrong, because we learned that if it was wrong or not quite perfect, we learned just as much as if we were right. And that should be just as exciting to know that, we thought we were going to improve the customer experience by doing this. We're going to improve it from this level to level A to level B, and guess what? We got halfway there. We shouldn't just be like, oh, that failed. Why? Let's go find out why,
Hmm.
and let's really understand that and be just as happy and satisfied with that. And that's hard. A lot of cultures view that as failure, and failure is a really bad word, and it
How
shouldn't
do
be
you get
be
past that
learned.
mentality? I mean, how do you get past that? I mean, it is, I agree. I hate the Silicon Valley mantra, like fail fast. I think fail fast is a stupid way to say it. You're really saying learn fast. And
Yeah,
a lot of you frankly learn more from things that don't work than things that do many times, because things that do work, you don't always know why they work. They just kind of did. And when you fail, you do a lot more introspection when they don't work out right. But how do you drive the culture that's accepting of, ideas, hypotheses, tests that don't work? Because that has to come through a lot of different parts of how the company actually reflects on those experiences. Do you have any tips or advice or experience on how you actually drive that kind of culture? And then I have a few more questions on this topic, but that was my
yeah,
first one.
yeah, sure. Well, I mean, we're kind of in that journey right now, actually, because OKRs are very new. Being objective
Hmm.
oriented is fairly newer.
Hmm.
I have a great set of really smart, really thoughtful leaders that I work with. Um, but it's still something that I think we navigate through, and we continue to kind of keep ourselves in check about. I think the best way, I hate to say it, but it's the truth. The best way to get folks to appreciate it is to have successes and do it, and show
Hmm.
the successes in it, and then and not crucify the perception of
Hmm.
failures, right? There's been many times there's been big capabilities that didn't quite meet the expectations that our organization or here in a past life had, and literally there'll be folks that'll come out and say, yeah, let's kill it, let's get rid of it. And and that for me, it's like I didn't like it in the first place, you know but let's not kill it. It just told us a whole plethora
Hmm.
of information about what could have been better. Let's go make it better, and if the pursuit is still the same pursuit that we're trying to go after.
Hmm.
But I think that's the way people can really gravitate to it more, is when they see it actually work, and they
Yep.
check their own preconceived ideas at the door over time to say, yeah, you know what, I would have done it this way, but now I see that the way that's coming together is really moving the
Hmm.
needle, and it's self-learning, if you will, and the model's continually self-pursuing these things. That's what's
Hmm.
also cool about it too, is that you're not just finishing a project, you're pursuing some movement of some key measure for our customer to move forward. And that doesn't stop with one release of a product or a second release. It's continual. And so I think once
Yep.
folks to see that in action and see the maturity and see the metrics move, I think that's when folks start to adopt the model and really the behaviors start to change.
And then my second question on this is how do you get the bank on board, particularly an institution like a bank, with the idea of test and learn? Because I've been through a number of now coming from the technology world and now selling technology into banks. The evaluation cycle, the amount of pre-work and sign off and just the process that goes into making even seemingly small changes can often be so daunting. You go, we better have this thing really perfect because we're not doing it twice. So I'm curious, there's the how do you get people accepting of failure? But there's also how do you get the institution accepting of moving quickly and iterating without overly burdensome processes and approvals and reviews? Because you can't learn quickly if you take 2 years to make a decision on a project. So how do you think about that side of the equation of getting the institution, the governance, the oversight groups comfortable with a more rapid iteration and learning process?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a often a misconceived misunderstanding within a lot of organizations, but especially ones that are in the financial services.
Hmm.
So the test and learn mentality that I speak of, it doesn't mean that we release things into production that we're uncertain of, right? Or that
Hmm.
provide any added risk to our customers. The testing and learning is through the validation that we do before we actually then take something further
Hmm.
into production. And I think that's usually a misconception that a lot of folks have when they think of test and learn, like, oh, you're just flinging stuff out into production and hoping it works out. No,
See what
by no
happens.
means. Yeah. By no means that's how it works. So you still have to put out quality software that does no harm to your customer and moves the needle for them and for the organization. That is a requirement. It means those are points in time within your process. You're testing and
Hmm.
learning all the way up until as you're ideating, creating the right solutions, then defining them, building them, taking them through all the testing and risk controls that you have to then migrate the conversion of that technology very effectively. So that means that milestone means you have something very sound in production that does what you expect it to do, and
Hmm.
under in a highly compliant way, which is really key to organization and most that are in banking and financial services. It doesn't mean you all your learning was prior to that. That means you did a lot of learning, a lot of testing, a lot
Hmm.
of validation with customers and others. Then you went after it and put it into production in a very controlled way. Now you're also learning, and you're not learning from a sense of, well, did I miss a compliance aspect, or did I miss that or the other?
Hmm.
It's more of, are you learning how the customer's adopting it? How are they getting value from it? What can we continue to tweak and improve from there, and then refine those learnings, and as you go forward too. And most folks don't appreciate too that roadmaps are living documents. They think that, oh no, this is your 6-quarter plan. If you better execute against it. If you don't, it's failure. Like, no, we might discover that the thing we thought it was going to do missed the mark, or maybe didn't quite get the value we thought, but we learned so much. Now we're going to reshape our roadmap. So it takes a lot of the throwing failure out the window, and really doesn't mean you want to just keep prolonging things. I think that's the part that people get caught up. It's not this binary thing that's like either it's planned or unplanned. No, you can still plan. You plan for value. You plan for, this is the value I want to
Hmm.
achieve in this quarter or this release. This is the value, so next one. And be razor focused on that. And it doesn't mean you can't keep pursuing, like you can't move off from one release to the next and not go after the value of that next release. You go after the value of the next release, but you shore up and you continue to improve the value delivered in the prior releases. And I
Hmm.
think that's the part that just people need to get a little bit more accustomed to that aren't used to this type of model.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, it's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is this. We spend a lot of time thinking about the funnel of our borrower and the friction points and the interaction points and how and like every little step, it's like we want to move this one 5% and this one 2%. And I think there's an underappreciation many times of the value of improving every step of the funnel. And to your point, if projects are evaluated and defined on, I want to move this step of the funnel from A to B, my number of people who start this process and finish it, or whatever it might be. Um, then you have a very clear metric for success. But I just think that the compounding benefit of if it's a 10-step funnel and you make every step 2% better, I mean, that's a huge improvement for the process. It can seem like a lot of little stuff. So I'm curious, do you guys use like a funnel metric that way, or like a funnel analysis when you're looking at the processes and think about the stages in the funnel that your current effort, like we're going to try and get this little part here a little bit better and this part better? Is that kind of the approach you take when you're thinking about the software you're building, and how you actually are approaching what you want to do in a given release, or part of a release?
Yeah, no, I think that type of mindset is absolutely at the core of how we're operating and
Mm,
adopting, if you will, from a methodology perspective. And, in this kind of business that we're all in, retention, capture, pull through are, easily key measures of success for us, right?
hmm
So if something like pull through was a key measure of success, which it should be, you don't just jump to the solution, right? The next question would be, great, to your point, right? What are those various stages of the funnel, and where do I think I might have the biggest opportunity to focus on first, second, or third? To
hmm
your point, you really want to focus on all of them, but if you can't, you can still focus on more targeted areas that you think are going to, where your measures
hmm
tell you you have the largest opportunity, biggest fallout, those types of things, and let it guide the way. So it's absolutely the way, the model that we're adopting, which is just, it's all about, it is just design thinking principles. Let's just go understand. Go
Yep.
understand the problem before you go, solve for it, and really go after the real problem that you're trying to go after. And if you're really, I guess, scientific about it, or thoughtful about it, it'll guide you there. You will go through all levels of the funnel, and that example you give, or worst case, you'll focus first on the biggest opportunities of that funnel, because your measure of success is pull through it in that example.
Yeah, you're measuring very clearly. So I wanted to ask, you made a comment earlier that I made a note I wanted to come back to, which is kind of lots of disconnected solutions that can, people are grabbing solutions, but there's lots of things that are good in a point, but maybe don't fit into the more holistic picture. And I'm curious how you think about finding external solutions, how that influences your build buy decision, right? When you're thinking about there's all these different solutions. And I see some banks are like, we're going to buy one thing and it's going to do everything. And we're just going to be that thing. And obviously there's another end, which is we're just going to buy lots of little pieces and parts and put it all together and hope. But there's a huge challenge there too, from a software development and engineering time point of view. How do you think about finding the balance of when you build, when you buy, and how you manage that kind of universe of maybe really good at one thing, but is that thing important enough for me to take an external party, or do I want to build something that's not quite as good, but maybe easier or more integrated? How do you navigate that landscape? Because it's, I think, something a lot of people in the digital transformation space are struggling with, right? Like, when do I buy, when do I build, how do I put it together, and how do I trade off those kind of different competing resource constraints?
Yeah, I wish we had a whiteboard. I could draw a picture for you, but imagine this visual. The way we kind of look at it is, I think of it in a quadrant, or across two
Mm,
axes. One being differentiation, one axis being differentiation, and one axis being complexity. That's just the easiest way to kind of wrap your mind around,
mm,
what you should be going after. And we're a little bit different. We're a big financial institution, and big
mm,
financial institutions are not, large software companies, right? So they're not, accustomed to building publicly available software and those types of things. So our encouragement is, we kind of start with some basic principles too. We don't build anything undifferentiated. Like, why? Why would we build anything that's
mm,
undifferentiated? So it's kind of like that's a standard principle. And then when we think of, things in a much more rich way, we'll look at it in that quadrant to say, great, you know what? If it's high differentiation, low complexity, maybe that is something we should build. If you think that's in the
mm,
higher end of the quadrant, and typically what you'll find in that area is probably things more around experience. Yep, not really complex, but super differentiated on what, Wells Fargo is an example, unique experience we can provide our customers because of how, the depth of their relationship. We can do something much more differentiated
mm,
than if we were like a monoline product, if you will. So that might be an area as an example that, where we might live and say, yeah, let's go build there. Where you see, and I'll go to that last top quadrant at the end, where it's, low complexity and low differentiation, like go partner all day long. Go partner all day long.
yeah.
There's no reason for us to be there. I think the part that people, and this is just my opinion, they treat them as more of a horizontal line, and there's just two segments of it. If it's, high differentiation, go build it. If it's not, don't build it. I draw a line in the middle of that with complexity. If it's high complex, high differentiation, go partner. Go find somebody who's best of breed in doing that
Mm,
thing that you need to do, who then can can complement what you're doing, and your point of view around it, but don't try to reinvent something that's fundamentally there, but just not there for your specific need. And so that's kind of the way to look at it, is there's very little that we want to build. It's going to be the low complexity, high differentiation. We want to really partner a lot with, and partner is probably the best word. I don't know what I would call down below, if you will, if I think about it in that quadrant, because I call everyone's a partner, but I think really partner, if
Yep.
you will, and that top quadrant, and really let their experience and expertise make that differentiation even better without the risk of, you're trying to learn a technology or advance a technology that is table stakes for some organizations or some companies and would be more complex for us.
Yeah, I like it. We'll have to get the note to myself, talk to the producer about getting your visual built so we can provide that along with the link in the show notes when we get this thing live. But I think it's a great way to think about it. I think I'm curious your thought on why you think others in the space, because I do see this as well, feel the need to build much more than really makes sense for them to build. There's a lot of that, like, well, we're not gonna partner with somebody in that. That's too important for us. And I go, yeah, but you're not differentiated at providing it. It's highly complex. There's places where that's the only thing they do, and you probably can partner well. And I'm curious why you think there is that mentality among many financial institutions that they ought to be building. I think often in their minds more than I think would make sense to build. And I'm just curious why, because particularly to your point, like they're not large software shops. When I see them trying to build a lot of software, I go, I mean, is that really what you're organizationally set up to do? And in certain instances, you should, but in many instances, I question if that's the right path forward, despite what I see many doing. And I'm curious if you've got a thought on why there's that mentality kind of broadly in the industry.
Yeah, it's definitely been a problem in the mortgage industry for quite some time.
Mm,
It's hard to characterize why. I think the core, I would say, belief system that folks have, and I've seen in my career in the mortgage industry more specifically, is, no, our problems are unique. What we're trying to do is unique. And there's this, and they'll try to talk themselves into looking at some problem statement
mm,
and in a unique way to them, rather than just sort of normalizing what it really means, right?
hmm
And that happens a lot. It happens a lot where it's like, no, we're unique. Our process is unique. This is unique. And the reality of it is probably isn't that unique at all. And I think that's where a lot of us get caught up sometimes, is really trying to separate what's unique. And I think it's also human nature. I think we love building things, right? You want to create something,
I
right?
love to build things. It's true.
So do
That's
I.
fair.
So do I, right? So I think it's human nature that we have to sort of check ourselves, because, and that's the game we play with ourselves, to say, well, my problems are unique, and I'm uniquely qualified to solve them, and
Mm,
that's, I think, part of the underpinnings of what drives that sort of behavior. And so the advice is, you got to just check yourself, right? You got to really just
yep.
distill, what are you going after, and that gets back to that top quadrant, the high complexity, high differentiation. It really requires a lot of checking yourself to say, well, what am I really trying to do here? Is it some rich
hmm
data science? Is it some rich, orchestration, whatever it might be? Okay, great. Maybe it's unique to my industry, but it's not unique from a capability perspective. So who can I work with that can partner there?
hmm
Because maybe, and to go after it. It just takes a lot of honesty with yourself and a lot of demystification on what makes us so special. Because the other thing too is, when you are super unique and super different, are you really going to be effective and efficient and predictable and provide really great predictable experiences for your customer? And it's so special and so unique to us. And so that's just kind of my opinion on it. Who
Yep.
knows if I'm right or wrong?
Well, we're here to give your opinion, so I'll take it for today. It is interesting. I've always found the mentality that I like is like, if I don't have to build that, what can I build? Right? It's kind of like, if I'm starting from scratch, I have, my time to deliver is huge. And if I can find pieces and parts that get me 50% of the way, then I can do a much better job on the 50%. And I can, to your point, accelerate my time to value, my learning speed, because I'm not having to reinvent things that maybe are elsewhere. So I always like to think of it as speed, but speed overall. Like, what's the big thing I can build? And I can make
Hmm.
that better if I don't have to, I'm not making my own nails when I work in my backyard with my kids, right? I'm like, we're going to buy the nails from someone. I don't need to get
Yeah,
melt
yeah.
some metal down. Like, let's go get those. And that'll help me, build something faster than I could the other way. So I want to pull the lens back a little bit. I mean, I know you've been in mortgage for a long time, and that's kind of your key focus, but do you see certain parts of the consumer lending ecosystem that are kind of more ready for the digital shift, or even that are more impacted, let's say, by the shift to kind of digital preferences by the consumer? Mortgage seems to me to be one that's in some ways the hardest. I mean, it is, to your point, tied to an inherently offline experience, right? Like I'm buying a house, usually going to see the house. There's inspections and appraisals and pieces that make a purely digital experience hard versus other kinds of lending. So I'm curious how you're seeing the digital kind of experience play out across different kinds of lending, where there's different needs and different, kind of complexities to doing that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely in the mortgage space. It's by the nature of it, much more of a complex transaction.
Mm,
I have a belief system, and that the more you empower, it's going to happen. It's a given, right? But
hmm
the more you provide the right capabilities to the customer, and allow they will become more self-directive, and they
mm
will guide themselves. And we've seen that play out in so many industries over decades, right?
hmm
You look at travel, look at airlines and brokerage and all sorts of different things that have completely changed the way consumers engage and get work done. And for me, I just see it as we've given them the capabilities that allow them to be empowered. And I think that's
hmm
the real kind of like path forward that we should all be kind of running towards, is how can we empower our customers. So kind of following that kind of belief system, what's I don't want to minimize some consumer lending products, but some of them are a lot more simplistic to
Yeah.
deliver than a mortgage, right? And so I think those are really great opportunities there. I think the trick is, it's sort of the things that we follow, and mainly because we have a much more rich relationship with our customer,
hmm
where we have many more connection points to them. I still just am a believer that it has to be an extension of their life, right? Otherwise, it just becomes a transactional thing for them. And sometimes those transactional things, there's nothing wrong with them. People,
hmm
discover that they need a solution for something, they go pursue that transactional solution, whether that's cheaper insurance or whatever it might be. But I think we have a good opportunity as fintech companies to really embrace going after adding more value to what our customers serve for. So I think when you look at more simplistic decisions around those things, we have a really great opportunity to serve our customers well. Whether and whether that's credit card or auto or personal lending, things that take place in a shorter period of time, but also require less complex decision points. Those are
hmm
really great opportunities to kind of empower those customers, and then by integrating it into their life, right? What they're looking for, whether that's shopping for furniture or shopping for a car or a boat or some other life experience that they're going through, making that making those products and services an extension of that experience. That's going to be, I think, really key. And I think those are easier places to tackle right now, especially on more
hmm
simplistic transactions, right? Especially when customers are much more open to get, like, I don't know about you, but I get my FICO from 3 or 4 different companies every month. I love it. I think it's great. So I think we're much more open to sharing information and being and having ourselves, I wouldn't say be exposed, but just being more open to getting access to information. So the more we kind of lean into that, the more we're going to empower our customers, and they'll be able to kind of take those products and services and integrate them into their shopping experience versus having it be a
hmm
separate transactional experience.
I like that. So you've mentioned a couple times the concept of kind of providing more value by having a holistic picture of the customer, a holistic relationship with them that encompasses different kind of offerings and products. How do you think about what it takes to really deliver on that promise? Because one of the things I see are either data silos within institutions preventing the intelligent use of. I've even had, I've talked to institutions, they shall remain nameless, that want to use their depository information in a credit decision and have to use a third party because they can't wire up the two internally. So they go, oh, there's a third party aggregator. We can just plug in, and they're going through a third party to get data from one silo in the company to another to assist with the decision. And the second part of that, not just data silos, but also kind of institutional silos, right? Like we often have product centric teams that are working on this product and this product. And to your point, some of the value comes being able to look across them. So what have you seen be effective in helping kind of both make the data and the objectives or the team operations kind of uniform and consistent across those products so you can actually deliver that value of being a multi-product experience as opposed to coming up like 5 different transactional products that a consumer can interact with? Because I think there's a lot of power in that, but I think my assessment is right now many institutions are not delivering that well on it. So I'm curious, you've mentioned a couple of times, what do you see as the way you really get to the point of being able to deliver on that kind of value?
Yeah, it's kind of like OKRs, right? It has to start from the top down, and we have that
Mm,
starting here really, really well. So to your point, a lot of large banks can come across as, and I say this all the time to people internally. I used to say this before I worked at Wells Fargo, is you go to any bank's website, um, what the bank is basically telling you but not telling you just by the implied way that they're engaging with you is, Jeff, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're going through in your life. I don't know how I can help you, but here's a bunch of products and services. I sure hope you figure it out. And that's what I think we're basically saying as a
yeah.
large institution when we have those types of experiences with our customer. And I think with Charlie Scharf's leadership and definitely with, uh, Mike Weinbach and Mary, and then with Christy as well, there's this deeper notion of one customer for sure. And we're
Hmm.
organizing ourselves to support that notion really, really well. So large companies like ours, we have to have an enterprise understanding, for lack of a better phrase, of our
Hmm.
customer. And to your point, it can't just be well, go get your products and services, and I
Hmm.
hope it all works out for you. We're really leaning on that reality for the future for us, and hiring some really great leaders. Uh, you know, uh, uh, Sandra Noodleman and Michelle Moore and Aether. There's been a lot of great leaders that they brought in recently that's helping pave the way for this common appreciation. So that's how it's going to be successful. Is it's top down. We have to first acknowledge that it's one thing to say you have one customer across many different products and
Hmm.
services. It's a whole other thing to align to an organizational constructs and technology constructs and execution constructs that allow those things to happen. So we have really great deep partnerships with our enterprise partners. We're starting to create notions of how we, navigate our longer term experiences with our customer across what they're
Hmm.
trying to do, not the way we see them, but the way they see them. But
Hmm.
that's where it starts. And so we're still very new on the journey. We're still taking care of some of the really good basics first. But there's such a great alignment on where we're going. That's foundational. If you don't have that, then who's Nate going to work with? To
Yep.
integrate that mortgage product with someone's financial life experience, you need that connective tissue, and it starts from the top.
Yeah, connective tissue and the joint objective that's really an important thing that you got to do.
Yep.
Well, Nate, I appreciate your thoughts today. I have three questions I've ended every episode of this podcast with, so I'm going to throw them at you now before I run out of time and lose you.
Okay.
Um, I'm excited to hear your answer. So, the first one is, what's the single best piece of career advice you've ever gotten?
Well, I would say, well, I don't know about career advice, but I think one thing that's always, I just never forget, is a gentleman, he probably has no idea. I don't know if, his name is Eric Stewart, and he was a consultant years ago. I was a kid. But he kind of mentored me for a little bit, and he got me wired to really think about what are the problems you're trying, everything should be addressed on what problem are you trying to solve. And what is the true problem you're trying to solve, and what is the outcome that you're trying to pursue. I think most of us, that sounds really simple. It's actually, I think it sounds like common sense. Common sense is not very common, right? So
That's right.
that to me has always served me well because it helped get me wired and to focus on what's right, the right things, to focus on the important things. And that served me well in my career.
Focus on the important things. I like that. So, my second question is, what's the single best piece of advice you've gotten about the consumer lending space?
Yeah, I think for me, it's sort of aligned to what I've been sharing with you. It's really keeping the customer at the center of everything that we do. And
Hmm.
what I think what people don't always realize is the customer is always at the center of everything we do, and they should be. And I've had
Hmm.
examples where folks say, "Well, hold on, the CRM solution is for our team members to convert leads and to do all these other kind of things." I'm like, nope, it's for the customer, right? We're trying to help them on their journey, and if you lose sight of that, you're not going to build the right capabilities that are
Hmm.
really going to solve the right problems. And so that's another one I think is really important, and I think missed. I think people think sometimes there's customers related, sometimes there's not. In my belief system, there's always a customer at the middle, and I think if you really understand your customer and understand what they're going through, you will create even better capabilities for the things that are much more, I would say, perceived as adjacent to the customer versus core to the customer.
Yeah, everything really starts from that, right? And then you got to, how does that play into this or that or the other?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my last question, what's one bold prediction for the future? Gotten all
Uh,
sorts of answers to this, but I always enjoy the answers.
I think it's sort of like what I was mentioning earlier. I think customers will rule. And I mean that. I think we've seen it in so many every case. In fact, I would probably challenge someone to tell me,
Mm,
show me a case where we've advanced and the customer isn't driving more and more of their own destination. And I gave you some examples
mm,
of travel. You used to always need an expert or someone to Sherpa you through the process, and now it's like you would never go to travel agent as an example. I think this, and I could repeat that example for so many industries and so many different
hmm.
services. I think it just tells us the more we empower our customers, and we're really focused on empowering them, the more they will self-direct, and that could be really frightening for some companies if you don't see that or you don't solve for it, right? Then you're focusing
Yeah.
on on the past and not necessarily the future. The future is about empowerment.
Yeah, if you're building a future that a set of technologies or capabilities or products that assumes the customer does not want to drive themselves, well, you're probably setting yourself up for failure.
That's right.
Well, Nate, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's been a really interesting conversation. I didn't think I would get to talk about OKRs in the context of banking, but I appreciate you bringing them here. And I loved your comment on focusing on the problem versus getting too fixated on solutions. I think that's a thread that's woven through our conversation, along with this idea of consumers self-directing, empowering the consumer to kind of be in control. And I will make sure we come up with a version that you appreciate of the complexity versus differentiation quadrants, because I think that's a really useful framework when thinking about some of these partner versus build decisions, and then where you really, frankly, also where you spend your time, what's going to drive the most value for the efforts you put in. I think it's a really useful framework, and I'm a big fan of frameworks. So thanks again for taking the time and joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Jeff, I appreciate you having me, and great talking to you.